Hey there. Today I'm talking about a few things that I don't cover that much on this podcast: the Disney College Program and the original Disney MGM studios, with my guest, Skipper Ben Rebstock. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society Podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 63 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. And as always, I am your host, Dan Heaton. One of the things that I really like to hear are behind the scenes stories of working at the parks. And I'm talking about frontline cast members that deal with guests every day at attractions, food service, and various areas. And one of the ways that many end up in those positions is through the Disney College Program. I still think back to when I was in school and I saw the presentation, and I wish I had taken the leap to actually go and experience what it's like to be in the Disney College Program. I was a little too tentative to make that jump, but my guest today did exactly that. He was so excited to go work at Disney World, and it is Skipper Ben Rebstock. If many of you have listened to the now defunct Inside the Magic podcast with Ricky Brigante, you are familiar with Skipper Ben through his many appearances over the years where he would tell stories about his time working at Walt Disney World. And Ben is still very involved in the Disney community through his top 10 lists that he does at Attractions Magazine, and now through the Marty Called podcast, which he recently joined with Tim and Josh, where they come up with ideas for Imagineering in areas of the parks that could use some help, like Future World at Epcot Center. I love hearing Ben's perspective because as someone who worked at several attractions, Muppet Vision and the Jungle Cruise, he was able to experience a lot of what it is like to work at Walt Disney World. And he still has a lot of ideas now on ways to improve the parks, specifically the Disney MGM studios where he worked at Muppet Vision for several years. So it was really cool to get to talk to him about his experience working at Disney and also his time at Inside the Magic. Before I get to my conversation with Ben, I wanted to mention there is a really cool way you can help to support the podcast through Patreon. You can become an official member of the Tomorrow Society and make a pledge of just $1 or $2 per show. That really helps to keep things moving and making this show go. And there's also some really neat benefits that you can receive, including the monthly Tomorrow Society Bulletin podcast, where I give more of my thoughts on the parks, and a Tomorrow Society pin and membership card. There's a lot of great stuff that you can get if you go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society, patreon.com/Tomorrow Society. Here is Skipper Ben. I listened to Inside the Magic years ago for a while, and so it's fun being able to kind of talk with you and learn more about your background with Disney.
Yeah, it's crazy how long ago all this started. Ricky and I were at the kind of forefront of all the social media and Diz Twitter, before Diz Twitter and everything kind of blew up. We were doing this a long time ago, and it's crazy to think back when this all started and what everything's grown to now.
Yeah, it was like the Wild West a bit.
Yes.
I talked to him, and it's like, I think now about putting out a podcast. I could not sure I could have done it then, because you have to be like a real computer expert. So today we have it really easy.
Yeah, no, luckily he did most of the manual labor on that, and I just got to record my voice and send it to him, and he did all the heavy lifting. So it's something I was very appreciative of.
Excellent. Well, let's go back to the beginning a little bit before that. So way back before you ever worked at Disney or anything, how did you get interested just in theme parks and Disney when you were younger?
Oh wow, we started going when I was about 8 years old and went every year after that. My family bought into the Disney Vacation Club the first or second year it started. My membership pass dates way back. It gets a lot of oohs and ahs when I turn it in and show it to people at the parks because of how old it is. And it was just something that we did as a family. I have two younger sisters and we traveled a lot, and we always bickered, like somebody wanted to go someplace, somebody wanted to go another place, but the one place we could all agree on that we loved going to was Disney World. So we went year after year after year after year, and I just fell in love with it as a kid and fell in love with not just the stories and the rides, but really the technology and how the place functioned and worked. And I knew from an early age that I wanted to experience that and I wanted to go behind the scenes and work there. And so it dates back. I was probably in 7th or 8th grade doing the backstage pass tour at Disney's MGM studios at the time. And I remember walking near the exit of the attraction, and I noticed the name tag of our tour guide had a college on it as opposed to the typical hometown that you saw on every cast member's name tag during that time. And I stopped her and I was like, "What? Why does yours say have a college on there?" And she said, "Well, I'm part of the Disney College program. I work here during my time away from school." And I just remember turning and looking at my mom and dad at that point and said, "I'm doing that." And from that point on, all through my high school years, everything revolved around how do I go work on the Disney College program, to the point that I got accepted at a college 20 minutes from my parents' house. Didn't take a visit, didn't do anything. I just knew I was going to go there because that way I could see my parents and my family throughout the school year, knowing that the first day classes were over, I was heading to Orlando and working in the parks. So luckily, I had parents and a family that loved the parks in Disney World as much as I did, so they helped feed into my obsession, and I was lucky enough to make a career out of it.
It's interesting to talk to a lot of people that went like as a family on the trips in the 80s and 90s, like myself and like you, that how much of an impact it made on some kids. I mean, I still kind of kick myself because I thought about the college program, but never had the same level of interest as you. So when you're preparing to do the college program and apply and all of that, I mean, what does that involve? Like, I mean, obviously you just applied, but were there things, like you said, you tried to do to better prepare for it? How did that work out?
Well, the strange thing was it was within 2 weeks of my freshman year of college that Disney was going to be on the campus interviewing for that next semester's college program. So I didn't have much time to prepare for it whatsoever. It was just one of those things through high school that I knew I wanted to do. Right when I got to college, I started looking it up and seeing what the interview process was, hoping that I maybe had 3 or 4 months to kind of prepare myself. Little did I know 2 weeks later is when they were going to be on campus. And I at that time, I felt that was my one and only shot to ever get to work for them. Didn't have the big picture all planned out, anything like that. So I signed up for the interview. And at that time, you had a 2-part process. There was a presentation that happened one evening, and then you would sign up that evening for interviews the following day. So I went to the presentation. I was the first one there. I was there hours before everybody else, dressed suit and tie and everything. I didn't know what to do to prepare myself to impress these people. But we get there, and it's essentially you were watching basically a Disney vacation planning video for about 45 minutes and telling you everything about Disney World, because part of the people that were there were not obsessed Disney fans. These were people actually looking for a job and career improvements and things like that, and going through their actual classes and getting Disney on their resume, not going there because they were just wanting to, work there as much as I did for forever. So we get there, we go through that 45-minute deal. Then they go through another presentation talking about the experience of working and living there and the living situation, kind of the ballpark on how pay would be done and things like that. And then at the end, you signed up for your interview. So I go up the sign-in paper and I get the earliest one. It was 8:30 in the morning the next day. So I get there again before the presenter ever got there the next morning. I was waiting at the door before they walked in and went in for my interview. And I knew I wanted to do attractions. The night before, they went through the different things you could do: custodial, attraction, hospitality, whole list of different things you could do. And in my mind, I was like gung-ho. I was going to work on the Jungle Cruise and I was going to work attractions. There was no questions about it. So I get there for the interview. The lady brings me in for the interview. She puts her hand and introduces herself to me. And before I ever introduce myself, I just look at her and I go, "Before we get started, I just want you to know I have no problem getting in front of large groups of people and making a total fool of myself. Hello, my name is Ben." So it went off from there. We had a great time. And, it was about 4 months later, I get a letter in the mail saying I was accepted for the summer internship program. At that point, all it said was I was accepted for attractions. In my head, I'm assuming I'm a Jungle Cruise skipper, and didn't quite work out that way.
That's always the thought I have. I think I would be there and I'd be like, I'm going to do attractions. And they'd be like, yeah, you're going to do fries in the fast food place. Or you're going to go work at Cosmic Rays or something. And to have it work out at least partially. I'm curious though, because you just mentioned, it didn't work out exactly that way. Where did you start when you ended up on attractions?
Believe it or not, at that time, the parking tram was considered an attraction. And I was like, no, that's not an attraction. So I get to the area that we lived at was Vista Way. Now there's a lot of, additional housing communities, but I was in the original Vista Way, the very famous complex where all the college program kids were living. And on your first day, you get there and you get some packets of information, but they don't give you like straight up exactly what you're doing. It's just like little tidbits, and over like a 4 or 5 day period is when you finally find out exactly what you're doing. So I get there and I find out attractions, and I find out Hollywood Studios. So immediately, as somebody who wanted to do the Jungle Cruise, that was a blow, knowing that, wait, there's no Jungle Cruise at the at MGM Studios. So over the next few days, I find out that I was selected for, they took into account that I wanted to do a spieling attraction. So again, they thought the tram was a spieling attraction. I considered telling you where your car was parked not a spieling attraction. So after going back and forth several times, they don't typically change your work assignments, but I was somehow able to weasel myself into Muppet Vision 3D. And luckily, at first I did not like that at all because there's, again, no real spieling in that except for greeting people into the theaters and in the pre-show area. But it ended up being my absolute favorite thing I ever did while working at Disney World. As much as I do love the Jungle Cruise, I loved my time at Muppets so much that I actually went back there a second time 3 years later and worked another summer at Muppet Vision.
Yeah, well, first of all, as far as the tram, I'm somebody who, if possible, tries to not have to take the trams. I try to, especially with kids, when we've had a stroller, I'm like,
oh yes,
oh boy, is there any way we could not have to take it? And sometimes you're like the Magic Kingdom, you're just like, well, whatever. Maybe it was different in the 90s. I don't really remember. Now it is definitely not an attraction, but Muppet Vision 3D, I think, yeah, because it's interesting, because I think, too, what does a person who works Muppet Vision do? I mean, they come in and they say, please go down to the end and all of that. And I'm sure you could go through the whole spiel. How did you find ways to I know that's an amazing attraction. It's a classic MGM Studios attraction. How did, though, you kind of get used to making that more enjoyable and not just the same thing over and over?
Really, it was the cast members that I worked with right off the bat. There were several that had been there since day one, and this was in 1999, so they'd been there for a decade, and actually a couple of them are still to this day working at Muppet Vision. It's as important for me to go see those people when we go on our visits as it is to ride Tower of Terror. And so working with those people, it was a blast. Muppet Vision was what we called a country club attraction, because it was quite easy to work at. So it's a very high seniority attraction. You had a lot of people that were high up in the union that worked there because there just wasn't a whole lot to it. So that kind of played into being able to have fun there when the regular part of the job is not that tough. You found a lot of downtime to actually have some fun with it. So, and speaking in front of 700 people in a pre-show area in a theater during the busy times of the attraction actually is quite thrilling if you are wanting to, kind of perform in front of people. It doesn't seem like much. You might only have a few paragraphs of spieling for each pre-show and theater area, but it actually was quite a bit of fun. And the other fun part was I had never done anything like that remotely beforehand. So it was kind of testing me to do things and get me out of my comfort zone that I'd never done before. So, and it was like you were working with Muppets and you were working, I got to say Kermit the Frog was my boss all the time, and that doesn't hurt either. That was a lot of fun.
I can think of a lot less exciting places to work. And your point about the country club, I hadn't really thought about that, because you think about, I don't know, a ride where there's constantly people getting on and off a ride, either a dark ride or your Space Mountain or whatever, which probably is exhausting. So I think you may have done okay there. So after a while, though, did you this is a very important question I have to ask you here, but did you get sick of Waldo after a while? Was there a point where it was just too much every time to keep being in that room?
Yes. We actually made contests out of it, though. Back then it was done a lot different now than the cast deployment system that they currently use, where a computer tells where a cast member is going to work in their next spot. Back when I was there, we had bump rotations, and you would start at one position, bump your way all the way through the different positions, and then when you got to the end, you got to have a 15-minute break. And after that 15 minutes, you would go to the front position and bump your way through again. So with the current cast deployment system, breaks are few and far between, but back then, we could get 15 minutes every hour, quite easy. One of the things we would do is we would test each other, especially in the theater area, to see who could sit in there the longest without going crazy. So we would, test it out. People would say, hey, I'm going in theater for a while. And you would, when that next person would come up and bump, you would quietly tap that person who's sitting in theater, and they could say you could bump around me and keep going. And so you would see if you could sit through 5, 6, 7 episodes of that movie. Now, while that does get really sick and boring and you really get tired of the film, you're also just sitting down in the back for 17 minutes at a time and getting paid for it in the dark. And that's not the worst place to be, especially during hot and humid summer months in Florida.
Yeah, that sounds like you said, a pretty cushy job to have, all things considered.
The funny part is back then, it would have to be a lot different now with technology, because back then we didn't have iPhones and things like that to keep us entertained. We would take portable CD players and headphones in the back and, take one CD at a time and sit back there. We would go to the front, welcome everybody in. And after you do your little bit with Waldorf and Statler and the show officially gets started, you just go to this back bench and you would sit there, put your headphones on, put some music in, and, sit through a CD or two and then get out of there. So yeah, with technology now with like an iPhone, I don't know how dangerous or actually how much more enjoyable it might be back there to help kill some time.
Yeah, it did make you, I'm sure you guys had to get more creative, like you said, in terms of how to waste time. Because I worked summer jobs here at our local zoo, and there were days when it was hot, it was boring, and you had to get more clever. Now you just bring out your phone. It's not the same thing.
Oh no, yeah, we used to, especially back when you had the Star Wars events where the different guests from Star Wars would come in and do autograph sessions. We used to go over to Star Tours and actually steal the boxes with the little autograph papers on them. And so it would say like it would have a picture of that guest or that celebrity, and below it would say their name and what their role was in Star Wars. And we would manipulate those and put different pictures in there, or put different, maybe inappropriate roles they would have in different films below it. And we covered the back walls of the break rooms with those things. So yeah, you had to find very creative ways to kill the time, because there was a lot of downtime at Muppets.
Yeah, I can imagine. So there's a big question too with the MGM studios, now Hollywood Studios. Muppet Vision is closed in California at DCA. We have Galaxy's Edge opening up, and I know they did just put in Pizza Rizzo over there, so that's kind of a little mini land. But, if Galaxy's Edge is super popular and they decide they want to expand it, are you nervous that Muppet Vision, it could be, I hope it would never go away, but I'm a little nervous for it.
Yeah, I would say I wasn't nervous for it until the most recent refurbishment, and they put that new marquee sign out front that is very generic and very easily interchangeable, that I don't know if they would just tear down the building and put a new Star Wars attraction there, or if they would put a new film or just some filler to keep to help kill some time for people who are waiting to get into Galaxy's Edge. But on my last trip, talking to some of my former cast members who are still working there, everything they've been told is that it's safe and there are no plans to do anything with it for the time being. But of course, that can change once we see how popular Star Wars is when it opens.
I would not think of it as the first thing they'd remove, just based on what it is. You've got, some sad to say, you got like One Man's Dream over there and some other areas if they're looking to expand the park. But its location is kind of dangerous. That's where it makes me nervous more, because it's so close to that area.
Yeah, the location's the tough spot, but you need those 700-seat people eaters, and that's exactly what it is. So I think when those heavy crowds are coming through and they don't want to wait, just 3 hours to even get into the land, knowing that they could hop into Muppets with no wait usually and take up, 35 minutes. Hopefully that helps it stay around for a while.
Yeah, I hope so too. So let's stick a little bit with MGM Studios right now, because that's what we're talking about. I know you're a big fan of the Great Movie Ride, and how much did it hurt when that closed? Have you gotten over it yet?
No, I haven't, and it's weird. Every time we go there since it's been closed, like it subconsciously in my head, I'm like, hey, we gotta get over to the movie ride and ride it, because that's something we would do every visit, no matter what, and often multiple times. And I'm not just talking like every vacation visit. If we went to Hollywood Studios 4 times on a 10-day trip, we did it at least 4 times, usually 6 or 7 times more likely, because it's one that I loved. It's one my kids love. My wife loves it. We all love it. It's just classic Disney at its best, and it still hurts tremendously that it's gone. Now, that's not to say that I'm not very, very excited for the new attraction going in, which I am. I think it has a chance to be a real groundbreaking ride that park desperately needs, but it does still hurt that the movie ride is no longer there.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, especially now that it's gone, like I enjoyed it, and it was, those type, like you said, the like classic, tons of audio animatronics, long attraction with, human interaction and everything. It's just it just really symbolized the whole park. And yeah, it would be great if they could have kept it there, maybe updated it, and added Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway in another place. That would be amazing. It's not about that at all. That attraction, if let's say it had not been closed and it had to be updated, I mean, what are things for you as somebody who's ridden it so many times, that what do you think they could have done to maybe update it? I don't like when people start to talk about like they should bring in all new movies. I love a lot of the old movies. It would be weird to me if John Wayne and Alien and all that wasn't in there. But what could they do to possibly maybe to extend its life, since the TCM overlay didn't seem to really do much?
Well, it's funny. On one of the last episodes of Inside the Magic that Ricky and I did, that was a conversation we had on ways to change the movie ride and update it. And my idea, which I still really like, was to not really change any of the attraction. There's not one scene that I would want to go away, especially with the films that they touched on, like Indiana Jones and Alien, very classic films. My idea was to update that final scene, and instead of a movie scene, it was going to incorporate a lot of audio animatronics of some of today's most famous movie stars in their current roles. So say there was no Marvel, restrictions of that being in the park, it would be like Robert Downey Jr. audio animatronic as Tony Stark in an Iron Man suit, and these things would line up both sides of the wall. And I'm talking 25, 30 of them on each side of you, just kind of peppering all around you. And then in the middle, where the two cars exited under the screen, would be an audio animatronic of Walt Disney, the guy who brought all this stuff together for us. That's what I would have liked, is just maybe a little bit more technology. We've always heard how the Wizard of Oz scene was supposed to go in there. It was supposed to be much more grandiose than it actually ended up being. I think that's where they really could have done some nice updating. And that's an area, if you're doing like audio animatronics in a room like that, you can interchange those much easier as opposed to interchanging full scenes that were currently in the ride.
Now, that's a great idea, and I can totally picture that, because that room with the giant screens is pretty large.
It's huge. Yep.
And really, though, I mean, I like that movie and all that, and I know they did update some scenes in the movie, but the ride really does peak, I feel like. I mean, the Wizard of Oz scene is amazing, but kind of that middle stretch where you go through and you have, Alien, Indiana Jones, Wizard of Oz, all that stretch is so good. And then the end is a movie, but in today's world, you got to show something more than that. So, I mean, it's gone now. It's obviously not going to happen. But in an alternate universe, I would love to see something like that, where they just put basically their best technology of animatronics, especially with, like you said, like Walt Disney in the middle or something like that. Something that people come out and they go, wow, this is like something I've never seen before. That would have been great to see. It just, there was never... I got the impression that, I mean, this was a big Michael Eisner attraction. It was the flagship of his first new park he put in. I think it was always kind of a thing that it was his thing, and then it was kind of a different era. I mean, the thing about it is, I know that with this new Star Wars, one of the attractions, the Rise of the Resistance, is supposed to have a lot of animatronics. But in general, I feel like the slow-moving, World of Motion, great movie ride, even Pirates kind of attractions. Does Disney still do that? That's the thing I wonder. I mean, do you think we will see things like that in the future, at least right now?
Well, what we have between the Star Wars attractions announced and the Mickey's Runaway Railway, which I don't think it's going to be a massive thrill ride, but it's going to be a fast-moving, fast-paced attraction. And then you got Tron. They haven't done anything like that in a long time. And unfortunately, I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because I just don't know if that's what the younger audience is consuming. And then you also have a theme park competitor right down the road that's definitely not doing any attractions like that. And you're trying to, in this like little theme park war they got going on right now, trying to keep up with each other. And it just seems like it's one thrill ride after another. And I miss the old slow moving attractions. I loved them. And it's something that desperately needs to be back in the parks at some point. I just don't think with the current regime that we have in power, that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, and I agree. And I understand, too, because like you said, with Harry Potter, and there's a new coaster coming Memorial Day-ish time, and who knows, a third park from Universal and everything else. they're looking at it as we have to wow people in 3 minutes or 4 minutes. We can't slowly build up and wow them in 15 or 20 or whatnot. So yeah, and I don't mean to be too negative about it. I'm just curious because, you having so much experience, like being at the MGM studios and seeing where that park is kind of a lot of the symbol of what's kind of happening with Disney.
Yeah, as a radio TV film major, what's happened to that park over the last decade plus is it's been tough to see. A lot of people talk about classic Epcot and missing classic Epcot. I love old classic Epcot, but I really loved old classic Disney MGM Studios and going behind the scenes and seeing how animated films were made and seeing how live television was made. That park is why I do what I do today, and why I got into the television industry was based on all those experiences I had as a kid, seeing all that stuff. It might have been in a theme park setting, and it might not have been presented as educational, but it was very influential and educational on me. And taking away the backlot tour and things like that, it's been tough. I love what's coming in, but I hate that it came at the expense of what that park set out to be when it first opened.
Yeah, and me too, because I took a lot of film classes and for a while really wanted to, in the world when journalism and film criticism was like a job, I kind of wanted to do that. So for me, going through like the Great Movie Ride and some of that and knowing so many of those old movies, I feel the same way. So I know before we move on, because I want to get back to kind of your career and kind of what you did, but I want to ask one more MGM Studios question. I know you guys do this a lot on the Marty Called podcast already, where you're kind of talking about, different ideas for Imagineering and such. So, let's assume I'm not going backwards and saying that everything's still there, but now they get Star Wars. They've got, Toy Story Land open, and they obviously Minnie and Mickey. But if you kind of had some input into how that park then would go forward, because it still has a lot of the sets and a lot of the look of old Hollywood, what would you do as like a next step, that just as an idea that would make that park kind of not just be thrill rides and such?
Boy, that's a tough question.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot here, so I don't expect a full proposal here.
I still think there's a lot of value. Like, I miss the old animation tour and showing how these things were made. And I think, especially since projects like Star Wars and such are those films are still being made. They're huge pieces of the Disney portfolio. I still think there is value in showing those behind the scene things. And I don't know how the attraction necessarily would be. I don't know, I miss on the Backstage Pass tour when they would make a film and bring in those sets from those films. 101 Dalmatians was one of the big ones that they did. And it was tangible. You get to see it in person and become a part, I guess is what I would say. In England, they have those tours of the Harry Potter sound stages in the studios, and even though they're not making those films anymore, people still flock over there to be a part of that world. And so I think you could do, especially with Star Wars, find a way to put some soundstage attraction together to bring those set pieces over. A walking tour is more than enough. Like I said with Harry Potter, people are paying theme park price admission to go see these sets over there, and there's no attractions, nothing to it. Bring that stuff over in that park and kind of connect the two of the experience to the the films that are giving you those experiences. And I don't know. I think there's still some value in having that connection, and people would want to see those things in that park.
Now, that's a really good example, and especially with the Harry Potter studios being a perfect example, because in 2, I feel like you need to have things for people to do that aren't just 4-minute or 5-minute attractions. And I know that's not really the model right now, but having something like that maybe people could wander around for hours. That's something for people to do when they can't stay in line. It actually solves what I think is going to be a big problem for them in the next year or two, where you give someone to do that also is really cool.
Yeah, it's done on a much smaller scale right now in the launch bay, but there are those pieces in there that come from the films, the props, and there's a couple vehicles and lightsabers and things like that I think it's still cool to go in there and see those things, and we make it a point to go do that every time we're in there. Just imagine if they brought over some of the large set pieces that J.J. Abrams used on the film. There's one thing to say that I went to the recreation of it at Disney World. There's another thing to say that I actually saw the physical set they used in my favorite movie. I think there's something cool there.
Well, yeah, and I think about it's not the same level, and it's a stunt show, But even for me, going, especially when I was younger, to the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular and being like, seeing those are recreations. It's not the same connection, but you still have that connection with the movie and such. And to do it where maybe you can walk through as opposed to sitting in an, on a bench and watching people do it. People still love that, even in the DVD, Blu-ray streaming era. So
Yep.
I think that's a great idea. I would like to talk to you more about, kind of what happened next for you. So I know you worked for Muppets, and then where did you go from there in terms of your work at Disney when you were there?
Well, at the end of that first summer, they put out a notice of hiring people to be recruiters for the college program back in your areas that you came from. And one of the key factors on that was if you work as a recruiter, when you came back, if you decided to come back and work on the college program again, you got to have much more of a say in where you ended up working. And that was my way of going, hey, I can be this recruiter for the next 8 months, and this is my chance to come back and work on the Jungle Cruise. So I applied and did get a job as a recruiter for the program. So came back here to Texas, and those presentations and the interviews that I talked about earlier, I was part of that team setting those up, going to multiple campuses all over the North Texas area, and being a part of that presentation, doing the Q&As, doing the answering, helping during the interviews, and did that for an entire school year. And then at the end of that session, going into my second summer in college, I let them know that I wanted to come back out to Disney World, and they put me on for attractions again. And again, after my last final in my spring semester, I was on an airplane, flew right out there, and that's when I got lined up to go work at the Jungle Cruise.
I can't imagine what that would be like, one, to do that job, because to me, you talk about talking to 700 people in the Muppet Vision Theater, and I say, I could do that. I'm fine with that. But for some reason, being a Jungle Cruise skipper seems like some other, and I know it was your dream to do it, but some other level. So when you start, they don't just put you in the boat, I would assume, right away. How do they train you to kind of become a Jungle Cruise skipper? Is it simply, hey, memorize the script, or are there other ways that they do so?
So it's about a 5-day training process, if I remember correctly, 4 or 5 days. And the first thing you get is your script. And it's about, I want to say it was 60 pages. It's a long script. They tell you right from the get-go, start memorizing this, go through it. And it was all broken off into sections. So each scene had multiple joke variations that you could do. And so on that first day, they're like, just start getting familiar with it, start picking out the lines that you like, and start doing some memorizing on it. But for your first 3 days, we're never going to touch a boat. The first 3 days is all about learning the attraction. It's about learning how to work the queue. It's about learning how to work the crowd control in the area. It's everything but getting on the boat. So once you got all that done and you check through that whole process is when they finally put us on boats. And when you did that, you got on there with your training crew. So I had 4 other skippers training with me, and we had our trainer, and we would get on a boat all by ourselves and just take it around the jungle. We would pass through in front of all the guests waiting in line and just kind of wave to them as we just got to keep going and going and going. And so you'd have a couple days of just nonstop going on around the jungle over and over again by yourself. And you would start with just getting familiar with each scene, and then they would slowly have you start standing up and doing some jokes, getting familiar with how to drive the boat, get familiar with how to run the microphone system, and things like that. And then you would just gradually move up until you were doing everything on your own, driving the boat and telling the jokes at the same time. And once you got comfortable with all of that, that's when they finally put you on with a live crew. And by crew, we mean guests.
That sounds like a lot of fun and also very, very nerve-wracking. So when you finally get on with the guests, what's that experience like? I mean, it was exciting, I'm sure. How nervous was that, and how did it go at first?
Well, I've got a fun story about this because I was kind of in a unique position. So the first time we were on the boats and going through each scene by scene, I not only had my trainer, but I had a training manager on the boat with us. Again, this was my dream job. I knew my jokes since I was like 16 years old. I knew exactly how I was going to do this. So as we're going around, I'm not really even saying anything. And this is after we learned how to drive the boat. So I knew how to drive the boat. This is when we're finally starting to get ready to start doing our jokes. So I'm off to the side just saying all the jokes to myself, and this training manager sees that. He goes, you know what you want to do, don't you? I didn't really know how to answer. I was like, yeah. And he goes, come with me as we got back up to the dock. And he gets me off the boat, and he puts me on a boat with a full guest load on it. And the first time I ever got on the microphone doing jokes was with a live crew. I'm driving the boat, and I'm telling the jokes, and I'm literally just shaking. I am scared to death because the funny part is this was my dream job. But like in high school and stuff, I did sports, so I did no drama. I did no acting. I had never done anything like this before in my life. And the only experience I had was my time with Muppets, so I was a little bit comfortable, on a microphone. That didn't bother me at all. I'm just kind of fumbling through my jokes. I'm getting through it. He's nodding and kind of laughing. I think he's getting a real kick out of watching me, sweat. The thing that was the funniest, though, is we get over to the savannah scene where the lions are taking care of that sleeping zebra, and my microphone came unplugged out of the boat. And so I'm sitting there doing the jokes. I can hear myself with the microphone PA system, and all of a sudden I can't hear myself on the PA anymore. And I'm driving a boat, and I've got an unplugged mic, and I have no clue what to do. So I'm fumbling around. I'm trying to find the cord. I can't find where to plug the microphone in. So I just start turning around and I start yelling my jokes as loud as I can to the guests as I'm like the microphone cord behind me trying to find it. And I finally get it plugged in by the time we get over to Schweitzer Falls and finish out the boat crew and everything. And we get out to the front and the guests unload and he's cracking up, but the training manager, but he's like, man, you handled that perfect when you got out there. When you had a situation where the equipment wasn't working properly, you didn't panic. You stayed calm in front of the guests and you carried on with the experience. And he checked me out right then. Right after that, I was working with crews immediately while the rest of my training crew, they were spinning out there 2 more days trying to figure out how to do this whole thing. And I'm already working in full rotation. So it was a trial by fire if there ever was one, but it worked out perfect. And, I can't tell you about my second ride through because I felt comfortable immediately right then. I knew I was doing what I was, had always dreamed of doing and got to do it a little bit faster than anybody else I was training with.
Yeah, well, it's like for some of them, it might have been, okay, I'll try this. They hadn't really thought about it much. And for you, this was like years and years and years in your head. So I love that story. It's amazing that you were able to actually do it. I mean, what was it about working on the Jungle Cruise, or why was that the job that you wanted, like going back years? What was it about the Jungle Cruise that really stuck with you?
I just remember being such a huge fan of it as a kid, growing up and going to the parks, and those skippers, something just resonated with me every time I got on there, and those jokes, it's my kind of humor, my kind of comedy. I love the puns. I love really bad, cheesy puns. As a kid, it just looked like to be the coolest job anybody could ever do. And it really was once I finally got to experience myself.
How long did you end up working at the Jungle Cruise?
A whole 3 months.
Wow. And ever since then, you're Skipper Ben. So.
Ever since then, I was Skipper Ben. Yeah, I worked there for 3 months. I've always said that that's my retirement plan is once I'm done doing what I'm doing here, I'm going to head to Florida and I'll just get back on that boat until I die. But it's odd. I went back the following summer. I did not go work at Disney, but the summer of my senior year, I went back and actually had a choice between Muppets or Jungle Cruise or anything else I wanted to do. And all of my friends were still working at Muppets, and nobody was working at the Jungle Cruise that I had worked with before. So I had no real connection there, but all of my friends were still at Muppets from 1999. I was like, I got to go back out and hang with those guys. And we had an absolute blast doing that.
Yeah, well, that makes total sense, but I'm sure it had to be still a little tough not to go back and do the Jungle Cruise again.
Well, the Jungle Cruise was it was a much tougher job than working at Muppets. And at the time, I was getting paid a whole $5.25 an hour. And when you're getting paid that little by Disney, you tend to take the easier job over the tougher job. And the one thing with the Jungle Cruise, especially during the summer, there was no indoor break room. We had a tent out in the back of the jungle. That's where we got to spend our time. So it's hot while you're working. When you're taking your break, it's even hotter in a plastic tent. So the air-conditioned confines of Muppet Vision 3D was calling my name that last time out there.
Oh, I can imagine. So I know you ended up working for Radio Disney at one point, but kind of how did it go from there after that summer?
After that summer, came back to school. I had one more semester, and the lady that was the main recruiter for the area, I still did recruiting for the college program all 4 years I was in college. And the main recruiter here in the Dallas area, she was good friends with the lady who worked at Radio Disney. And it wasn't just Radio Disney, it was all of ABC Radio Networks was broadcast out of Dallas. And so you had the National Radio Disney Channel as well as about 14 other syndicated radio stations. We had an all-country station. We had an all-rock station, just the very generic radio that Disney owned and sold it throughout the country for airplay, was all done out of Dallas. And so she just connected me with somebody that she knew over there, and I went and took the lowest level job possible, worked my way up to a producer, and I was at Radio Disney for nearly 5 years.
Wow. And around that same time, I believe, is when you started recording segments for Inside the Magic, which I'm sure your radio production experience probably helped with that. But how did you get connected with Ricky and doing those segments for his show?
Well, I had a long commute from Radio Disney to where I was living, a good hour and 15 minutes to and from. And so, this is the early days of iPods and all that stuff. And I think I could put, this was when Ricky started, and you had shows like Window to the Magic as well, the very early Disney podcasts. And I think at that time you could put like 1 or 2 hour-long shows on your iPod. That's how much great memory they had on them. And each car ride, I would load up the latest episode and take the drive over, and it really helped kill the time, and you put you back in that place where all these podcasts do. Any Disney fan, we're just looking for escapes, especially if we don't live in Orlando or live near Disneyland. We're just looking to escape for a little bit, and these podcasts were a great way. And I can't remember my first episode. It had to be 12 to 15 episodes in of Inside the Magic. I remember being at the YMCA in downtown Fort Worth on a treadmill listening to the show, and it was this treadmill with a mirror right in front of you. So I'm just staring at myself listening to the show, and just somewhere in the middle of that episode, it just clicked. I was like, I work at a radio station. I could do this. I wonder if he would love to hear my perspective of somebody who worked at Disney World, because at the time he was billing himself as the only Orlando-based podcast about Disney. And I was like, well, if you're the only Orlando-based podcast, you could also be the only podcast with a former Disney coworker, cast member on that show. So right after that workout, I got home, fired him off an email, and it wasn't very long after that. He was like, I would love to have you on the show. And I went back to the radio station, put together my first segment of Cruising the World, and sent it into him. And we just went off from there, and it lasted for many, many years.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about that time. And like we mentioned at the top of the show, where I had an iPod, I think it was like 8 gigs. It might have even been less. And I remember, I went to college, and then I didn't go as closely, but then I went back to Disney World in 2005. And it was right around then when I was like listening to some movie podcasts, and I'm like, I should see if there's any Disney ones. And one of them was Ricky, and it was really early. I mean, I remember it was like episode 3 or something crazy like that when I listened to it. And I just remember being like so amazed that I could listen to somebody who just was like really into Disney and listen to him talk like out of his basement then for like hours. And I mean, that whole timing was just, and I don't want to look back fondly and say, now there's so many amazing shows out there, but it was just so surprising that would happen, because especially like, commercial radio was still so dominant, or, NPR or whatnot. So to have this was something. So, I mean, I think it was great. So, I mean, you guys, how long was it before you actually met in person when you were doing that?
Oh, it wasn't long, because even at that point, my future wife and I, at that point, we're still going to the parks all the time, especially since I was working for Disney. I had great discounts and got free park tickets. And the best thing you can do is work for Disney away from Orlando, because not many people utilize the free park tickets. And so I would go around the office and just gather up everybody's tickets a couple times a year, and we'd head out there. So yeah, it was not long after we first started that Ricky and I met. And that was really that was the eye-opening point, because especially back then, recording a podcast, you're like, is anybody listening to this? Are we just doing this for our own sake? Are we the only two entertaining each other? But then we'd get to the parks, and I can't tell you how many times people would come up to me, and this was before we really started putting videos and pictures out. They would recognize me by my voice and stop me in lines and be like, are you Skipper Ben from Inside the Magic? And I'd be like, are you kidding me right now? And that happened so many times in the parks and away from the parks. It happened to me in Las Vegas. I'm stopped on the casino floor of the Planet Hollywood Hotel one night because somebody heard me playing blackjack. And just nuts at that point. So that was the cool part, is like when you finally realize that, hey, people are listening and they are enjoying the show, and it really made all the time and effort worth it. So Ricky and I had a blast every time we got together out there. We did some segments. My favorite thing we'd always do was TTA talk. We would hop on the TTA. We'd have a topic, and we would record a segment on that topic from the beginning of the ride, and the segment would end by the time we got to the end of the ride. And at that time, today it's not a big attraction, but back then we could not get off the ride, just stay on, and we would get back to the launch point again, have another topic, and we'd sit there and record 5 or 6 segments that we would use over the next 5 to 6 weeks of the show. People really love that stuff. So we had a lot of fun working together.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how big that show became because it was so early. Like you mentioned, I was going to ask you about what it was like when people started recognizing you because, now there's so many shows and some are do well and others aren't, but it's tougher to kind of stand out where you guys were really, like you mentioned, I mean, there were so few. It's really something that you both, and plus segments like yours and others were high quality because like you said, you had this radio background. The fact that all came together, it's just, it's still pretty surprising that early on.
It was a perfect timing for all that stuff. We got real lucky with it. Different shows started popping up. And actually, Ricky and I love that part because as much as we love making our own show, we wanted to listen to that stuff as well, especially me being away from Orlando. He was so much more closer to it and had access to the parks all the time. But I liked listening to our show, but I wanted more and didn't want to hear my own voice over and over again. So we liked it when more shows started popping up. But we got out there ahead of everyone and just it was perfect timing for what we wanted to do.
It was great to see and basically started the whole, on the Disney side, really started so many podcasts. There's so many people like me, I think, that listen to Ricky and Lou Mangello and WW Today and all those that probably have now started shows partially based on that. I mean, I didn't think about it. At the time, I wasn't sitting there going, in 13 years, I'm going to have a podcast, but still it made a difference. So speaking of that, you recently joined up as one of the, the third member of the Marty Called podcast with Tim Grassi is one of the hosts who's also been on my show 3 times, amazingly. So what interested you about doing podcasting again, kind of as a co-host on a show?
It was something that we wanted to jump back into for a while after my time on Inside the Magic ended, which was just more of a, I got real busy with work. At one point, Radio Disney got consolidated into the Disney Channel. And so all of the operations that were done out of Dallas were moved to Burbank. And I had the option to, go out there and move out there. But unfortunately, the job wasn't paying well enough to move from Texas to California. So at that point, I took a job with Fox Sports and currently work with them to this day. And so when that transition happened, I just had a lot more responsibilities in a new work area. And so my time on Inside the Magic just kind of faded off. Ricky and I would do some stuff from time to time, and we still see each other when we go out to the parks. It's still a great friend. And I just had other things consumed at that point, also had children and all that fun stuff. And it just kind of got away from me, but it was always something I wanted to get back into. I had done a few things. I did a little show called Cast Member Confidential. That was a kind of a YouTube show that I had a lot of fun doing that, but it was much more ambitious in my head than I had time for it to be. And so that kind of went away for a little bit. But at the same time, I was still listening and consuming all these shows and still on social media and interacting with all these people that I've met over the years. And Tim became a friend of mine just through social media and listening to the E-Ticket Report and in the WW Fanboys and stuff he had done in the past. And just an opportunity came up where I was opening on that show, and he knew of my past. He was a big fan of Inside the Magic and knew the stuff that I could bring to the table, and reached out to me and just asked if I'd be interested in doing it. And things just fell into place where I was wanting another creative outlet and wanted it to be away from what I was doing with my job, and it's just good timing. It came along that way, and we've been doing it now for a few months and having a blast with it.
Yeah, it's been great to hear because, that show started and they did a few episodes. And then when Tim mentioned that it was going to be starting up again and you were joining, I was like, that sounds great. And the few episodes that I've heard so far that you guys have done have been a lot of fun. And because you guys have focused on things like, which is a topic that I talk about a lot, which is Epcot and what to do with that. So that's been really fun to hear.
I'd be remiss because I know Tim's probably listening right now, but I have to say that, the show has gotten a lot better since I joined it.
Well, that's true because, early on I was like, oh my gosh, these guys. And they're like, wow, something's different now. I just can't put my finger on it. But I think you've nailed down what the difference is now.
Yeah, I carry that show. Tim and Josh, they, they do their best to stay up with me, but I'm kidding. I love those guys.
Well, one of the things you guys have talked about is Epcot. So, and I know we haven't really mentioned that, and I know MGM is kind of your place, but looking at Future World, I mean, I know you guys talked about it a lot on your show, but what do you think Disney should do with that? Like, what, I've kind of asked this earlier, but what, for you, what would be exciting to see there?
What would be exciting is you'd be, a blast of the past and look back at what made that park great when it first opened. But within the last couple episodes of Mardi Called, we've resigned to the fact that that's just not going to happen. Especially on our last episode, we had a homework assignment where we tried to figure out what intellectual properties, especially since that's just the way it's going. That with the current regime that's in there, if it's not an intellectual property that can be tied to an attraction, it just doesn't have a good shot of being made. So we tasked ourselves into coming up with IPs that would work for attractions, either to take over current ones that are there or new attractions onto itself. And the crazy part is, if you go in and listen to that show, all three of us came up with some really good ideas. As much as we might be against just flat out IP based attractions, the three that we walked away with were very interesting and had a twist that, kind of gave a little nod back to the classic Epcot while staying modern and current and being attractions that the powers that be would like them to be now. And the thing is, we're armchair Imagineers. We don't know what we're doing. we're making stuff up on the fly. So if the three of us could come up with three decent ideas, there's still some hope that the current powers that be that are out there can come up with even better ones. And I think there is a way to do attractions that might have ties to characters or movies that are out there now, but still give that kind of educational, that still fun element that we all grew up loving in that park. That can still find its way into these new attractions.
It makes me a little sad, not as much just because of the intellectual property. I've kind of accepted that, but I just want to see ingenuity and originality in the attractions. And I think that's what you guys brought up on that show, is just some original ideas that sounded interesting. And that's really what I want to see. So I know we're starting to wind down, but I wanted to finish with a little bit of like a rapid fire segment to just kind of hit on a bunch of different topics and your thoughts. Are you game for that?
Sure.
Okay, great. It's just some quick questions. You can give a little explanation, but it's not, it's more like off the top of your head and for a few different things. So here we go.
Okay.
All right. Which very popular current Walt Disney World attraction does not work for you?
Very popular as in wait time?
Yeah, wait time. Yeah.
I don't understand how people can sit in the queue for Navi River adventure as long as they do for as short of a boat ride as that is. I like the idea of having a boat ride going there. I was very excited to see that, but for as short as it is, very disappointed in the execution of that. I like the technology in it, but I could have gone for something 2 or 3 times longer.
Yeah, I agree. I love that attraction, but I used a fast pass, so that probably sums it up. All right. You need to rank these 3 past Disney MGM attractions from your favorite to least favorite. Here we go.
Okay.
Superstar Television, the Monster Sound Show, and the Backlot Tour.
This might shock people, but the Monster Sound Show, I think, is one of the most underrated things that's ever been in a Disney park. Love that thing. The Backlot Tour, and then Superstar Television.
Yeah, I also thought, especially after I saw Sounds Dangerous, was like, oh, this is not so good. So
the Monster Sound Show, I cried laughing every time I saw that thing.
They really did audience participation in a fun way. All right, so big question here. Which do you prefer, the Western scene or the gangster scene?
Gangster scene, and that's hard for a Texan to say.
Well, also because I feel like after a while they just stopped. They never even let me do the Western scene after a while.
Yep.
But early on it was fun. Okay, you can only choose one of these. The Muppet Movie or Muppet Christmas Carol?
Oh, the Muppet Movie.
Yeah, I agree, but I wondered.
Christmas Carol is very good. We just watched it again before this Christmas. It's one that we check out all the time, but the Muppet Movie is just classic.
Oh yeah, totally. All right, so this will air after the final result, but make your pick. Will the Cowboys defeat the Rams this weekend?
Heck yeah. How about them Cowboys?
Are you willing to say they are going to be in the Super Bowl?
I wouldn't be a true fan if I didn't. So, yep, Super Bowl, baby.
Okay. All right. So this is very important also. Robert Iger has deleted his Twitter account. True or false? This was caused by Tim Grassi.
it was 100% Grassy's fault. And there's a list of more people that I want him to take out on Twitter. So we're going to get working on that before the next Marty Called.
Excellent. I think you have an idea for another episode.
Yes.
Okay, last question. Very simple. What is your all-time favorite Walt Disney World attraction?
Oh, man. Yeah, somebody is called Skipper Ben. I should say Jungle Cruise, but it's the one right next to it, Pirates of the Caribbean.
Excellent. Yeah, I wondered, after I asked the question, I thought, well, he's just going to say Jungle Cruise.
Pirates gives me the warm and fuzzy every time.
Well, that's a great choice. Okay. Well, this has been a blast to talk with you. I feel like we could just come up with new ideas for the parks for a while, but that's what you guys do on Marty Called, so I don't want to steal your thunder. If listeners want to listen to that show or just connect with you online, where should they go?
Look up Marty Called in iTunes and every other platform that you can find your favorite podcast, and you can find me on Twitter at RealSkipperBen.
Well, Ben, as somebody who loved Inside the Magic and has been following you for a while, this was really cool. Thanks so much for being on the show. It was a great time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Well, that was great. I loved hearing Ben's stories, and I hope to have him back again at some point in the future. If you'd like to learn more about Inside the Magic and what happened there, you should listen to episode 48 with Ricky Brigante, the creator and host of Inside the Magic. And you can find that and a lot more at tomorrowsociety.com. If you'd like to connect with me, you can email me, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter at tomorrowsoc, or Facebook, Instagram, or Pinterest at Tomorrow Society. Thank you to my new members, Lizzie, Christopher, Daniel, and Kelly. If you'd like to learn more about becoming a member and supporting the podcast, again, you can go to patreon.com/Tomorrow Society. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking to Peggy Ferris, who worked at Disney for 50 years, including time at Imagineering, where she produced Spaceship Earth and led Imagineering at Disneyland Paris. You're going to want to hear this show. Thanks again for listening and all the great support, and I will talk to you again very soon.